In this lecture, we're going to be covering part 1 out of 2 parts for developmental theories, and we will be using these lectures as a foundation for the remaining lectures throughout the semester. It's important to have knowledge of different theorists and their theoretical approaches to child development to better understand the basis of studying child development and having knowledge of children at different ages and stages. This is just a little bit of information about what a developmental theory is. So it's principles and generalizations, and so it's a group of ideas and assumptions that we're using to interpret human beings and the growth that they are having throughout their lives. And so we're using this as a framework to understand from conception all the way through adolescence, who are human beings, what are they doing, the patterns of their behavior, problems within development, typical and atypical development. So there's many different things that we're using within developmental theories. It's important to recognize that theories are not facts, but they're neither true or false. So that goes back to when we were looking into different aspects of research. So we can get research on different theoretical perspectives, and there's not a right or wrong way to go about looking at the theories. These are just ideas that we're proposing about different aspects of our world, and they're useful for learning about individuals, learning about our behaviors, our interactions, learning about different kinds of points in our development, and they give insight to guidance and how we can further move forward with the kinds of work that we do or the kinds of understanding that we have related to diverse groups of people. One example of a theoretical perspective is the understanding of epigenetics. So this stresses that genes and biological impulses are powerfully influenced by the social environment. So I strongly encourage you to check out the TED Talk link that I've included here just to have some more knowledge on epigenetics, and this will also help you to kind of set up the tone for looking at nature versus nurture. And so this TED Talk is about 16 minutes total runtime. So again, I strongly encourage you kind of taking a peek at that. Same with any videos or links that I include. It's important that you take a peek at those just so that you have a better understanding of what we're discussing throughout the weeks. The first psychoanalytic theorist that we're going to be talking about is Sigmund Freud, and so he proposed different psychosexual stages of development and really looked at children's interests in their body parts and their interests in pleasure-seeking areas, as well as interests in developing skills for using the restroom. And so we often can refer back to Sigmund Freud's stages of development when we're looking at children using the restroom, potty learning, things like that, and trying to also figure out when children are getting into puberty, kind of what those psychosexual stages of development may look like. And we also see that Freud explored different elements of social and emotional development. And so he looked at our conscious and unconscious minds and kind of put those into categories of the id, the superego, and the ego. And this is really just kind of figuring out who we are as human beings. So oftentimes as we're going through different stages of development, there's different aspects of considering, who am I? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? And so as we get into different stages of our lives, we have conscious ideas about who we are, but also have some underlying tones of trying to figure out elements of where we want to go, who we want to become in comparison to others, also just that battle within ourselves. And so this often plays into children's objective and instinctual anxiety, and so anxiety that could potentially be produced into figuring out different aspects of our social environment. So again, comparing ourselves to others, maybe in the perspective of school performance. It could also be emotional attachment or detachment to our caregivers. So again, looking at who we are as individuals in terms of social and emotional development, as well as different psychosexual stages. Erik Erikson also looked at psychoanalytic theories, and he more was a stage theorist, and so he looked at human beings from the moment they're born until the moment that they die, and determined that we have different developmental crises that we go through during this time, and that we have desires that we'd like to accomplish. And so within this, he strongly looked at the influence of our environment and also considered context of family, culture, society, all of those different elements of our world and how they impact our ability to either complete a task or to have this stage of crisis that we're not able to meet. And so again, social environments are kind of the driving factor of whether or not we're able to deal with this perspective that is taken place during this point in our lives. And so, for example, if we were to look at trust versus mistrust with our infants, the moment that they're born, they are seeking caregiving attachment from those closest to them. So whether this is a parent or a teacher, most likely it's going to be the initial parent. And so can they trust this individual? And if they cannot trust this individual, it's most likely that their basic needs are not going to be met. For example, if they cry out and their caregiver doesn't attend to them, this can cause that mistrust to happen, hence being in crisis mode. Whereas if they cry out, caregiver comes to check on them, a trust and a bond is formed during this time, and then they can move into a stage of seeking security, forming a healthy relationship. And so there are positive and negative impacts of our social environment on our different stages of development throughout our lives. On this slide, you'll just see another example going into Erikson's theory a little bit more. So this is touching on initiative versus guilt, so for our preschool age children. And so this just gives some examples of if the child is having connection with initiative, they might be able to cooperate well with others, lead, be in a leadership position, as well as be able to follow others. But if they're immobilized by guilt, hence falling within that crisis mode, they may be fearful, hang on to groups of people. And so when we're considering our role as a teacher or a parent, it's important to engage in activities where children can take the lead and where they can have choice and have initiative in order to help them to reach that point of feeling confident and capable. And so this is just, again, another example of what you might see related to Erikson's theory. Next, we're going to talk about behaviorism, and we're first going to start with B.F. Skinner. So he looked at ways through operant conditioning to basically increase or decrease the likelihood that behaviors are going to occur again. And so this was termed as reinforcements and punishments. And so there are aspects of both positive and negative reinforcements and positive and negative punishments. And so again, the goal with this is to increase or decrease behaviors. And so, with positive reinforcements, we're looking at being able to increase a behavior. So if I'd like a child to continue to use kind words, I may provide them with praise and encouragement to say, I really like the kind words that you're using, in order to want them to continue to do it again. So I'm positively reinforcing the behavior that I want them to accomplish. Now, if I'm providing them with a negative reinforcement, instead of adding to the equation, I'm taking something away. And so I still want to increase the behavior, but I'm removing something. And so maybe I want children to be able to clean up. And so maybe I'll remove different kinds of obstacles that are in their way, or even with student work. If I want students to participate in the work that I'm giving them, maybe I remove some of the work that they have to do in order to increase the likelihood that they'll still do it. And so I'm reinforcing the behavior that I want, but I'm taking away something. Now with punishment, I want to decrease the behavior. So I want to decrease the likelihood that the behavior will happen. And so I can either add something to the equation or I can take something away. And so if I want to use a positive punishment, I'm adding to the equation in order to decrease behavior. So maybe I want to decrease the behavior of hitting. And so maybe I add in more supports. I say, you know what? I'm going to be following you around the classroom in order to anticipate when you might hit somebody else. So I'm adding in more following around in order to hopefully decrease the behavior. However, maybe that's not working. And so I want to remove something in order to decrease the behavior. So maybe I notice, oh, okay, I'm seeing that child is still hitting. Maybe it's because the lights are overwhelming or the sounds in the classroom are overwhelming. And so I remove that adverse stimuli that is causing the child to bite or hit. And so that would be a negative punishment. I'm taking away something in order to decrease the behavior. And you'll notice that they can go in tandem. So then I might be adding in, decreased noise. And so it could be both a positive and negative reinforcement and punishment. They can work kind of in tandem with one another. But really the goal for this is how to re-influence behavior. And you'll see here that I've included a study that Skinner actually did with his own child. And so this is a video that just basically indicates the use of snacks and lights and sounds in order to increase the likelihood that the child is going to go and grab the snacks out of the box. And so feel free to take a peek at that and listen to kind of the description of what's going on during that video. And another goal with this is not only to influence behavior, but also to create a process of learning. And so repeating the action and also distinguishing undesired elements, so something that is unwanted, which makes an action likely to less happen over time. And so your text talks about this more. We'll still get into this in a little bit more detail later on. And keep in mind that the theories are just an intro to what is to come. We're not getting into them in great detail, but B.F. Skinner did definitely look at behavior and how we can influence behavior. That's the main goal here. As you can see here, I've included an image that I went into a little bit of detail in the previous slide related to Skinner. John B. Watson also explored operant conditioning, and so in tandem with Skinner, they looked at how to reinforce behaviors, and so proposed that we can learn anything when we focus on behavior, and that really what he was looking into is that there's no specific age where reinforcement and punishment is focused on, and that anybody at any time can engage in behaviors that can be altered based on the kinds of stimuli that we provide into the environment. So whether or not we want to increase behavior or decrease behavior, we can add or take away stimuli within the environment, and this can then adjust the behaviors that we see happening. And so this is focusing on that nurture side and conditioning and teaching individuals. So this comes into play often when we talk about developmentally appropriate guidance. We use aspects of the theory proposed by our behaviorists in relation to reinforcements and punishments and how we influence behaviors. And so I've also included a video that talks a little bit about John B. Watson and how he looked into behaviorism and talking about little Albert, 9-month-old, and basically just generalizing sounds and connections between the behavior of those sounds. So feel free to kind of take a peek at that and get more into the theory that he proposed. And that link also takes you to many other related videos of different kinds of theorists. And so I encourage you to take a peek at that. You might see videos in there related to Ivan Pavlov, Bronfenbrenner, so all different kinds of individuals, Froebel, and so they are different theorists within the realm of child development, and so it can kind of be nice to have those just go-to videos if you need quick information on each of the theorists. So again, another behaviorist is Ivan Pavlov, and he looked at more classical conditioning, so we can learn behaviors and they're associated between a stimuli and naturally occurring events. And so he looked at dogs and salivation and how we can basically consider the unconditioned response and conditioned response and look at the stimuli. And so we can look at human beings and see that there are different meanings to the stimuli that are proposed within our space. And so the unconditioned response, it is stimuli that elicits just a response. So in the example here, we have food, and the unconditioned response to the stimuli is that we will salivate and be hungry when we're presented with food in front of us. And then we see that there is a conditioned stimuli and a conditioned response. So we can basically train individuals when they hear the bell ringing that they will also salivate, indicating that we are wanting them to salivate based on the stimuli that we are controlling within their environment. And so we have natural born instincts to our environment to salivate when food is presented to us or if something spooks us. However, we can condition people with a bell or a light or another kind of sound to be conditioned to have a particular response within that. Same with if we're having people say please or thank you with a certain stimuli. If somebody says, please, you might say thank you in response, or, you're welcome, whatever that might be. So we're often conditioned to have certain kinds of responses in different kinds of environments or when different stimuli are presented to us. So again, just another video to kind of help wrap up what Pavlov is discussing. And that is our last person on the behaviorism side of our theorists. And last but not least, I did just want to include a aspect about some challenges that we may encounter when we are using different kinds of reinforcements. And so they're different for each individual person. So consider the students that I was mentioning that maybe we want to increase their scores. For some students, I might reinforce them with stickers. Other students, I might give them praise, but this might not work for everybody. And so I have to consider that the reinforcers that I present may or may not work. And I have to kind of go back to the drawing board, maybe ineffective. So if I'm using stickers over and over again to encourage students to do their work, and maybe students are like, well, I already have enough stickers, I don't need any more stickers, it gets lost and there's not as much effectiveness with that anymore. So then I have to reconsider what kinds of reinforcements are needed in order to continue to produce this behavior or to decrease the behavior. And it can be hard to constantly reinforce and reward, especially if we're not having an intrinsic motivation. So a sticker is an extrinsic motivator to being able to produce, test scores or to get students to behave in a classroom, for example. But if there's no internal motivation or moral connection to that or want to do that, it may reduce the likelihood of self-control and the ability for us to then regulate the behaviors that we're presented with. And sometimes we see that reinforcements and punishments in this regard are not developmentally appropriate. And so we do have to then go back to the drawing board and consider, one, the behavior that we are wanting to alter, increase or decrease, and two, the kind of stimuli that we are providing, whether we're adding or taking away stimuli, and if they're developmentally appropriate for the age, the individuals in their cultural and societal context, as well as different kinds of individuality for each person that we are considering.